This episode of All About the Insight, Owen Hathway, Assistant Director of Insights, Policy and Public Affairs at Sport Wales, shares his unique journey from politics to insights. Owen tells us about the challenges of measuring impact and emphasises the importance of human stories in effectively communicating insights. He also reflects on the potential impact of AI on our industry as potentially revolutionary for data analytics, but also with a risk of losing person-centred insights. Please enjoy listening. Hi everybody, and welcome to All About the Insight. Our guest today is Owen Hathway, Assistant Director of Insight, Policy and Public Affairs at Sport Wales. Hi Owen.
Hi Alex.
Lovely to have you here. As you know, Owen, this podcast is all about how and why insights matter to businesses and how we can really improve the profile of insights and make sure that insights are, kind of at the centre and forefront of everything that businesses do. But before we get to all of that, it would be lovely just to hear a little bit about you and your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks Alex, and thanks for having me on. I'd like to think that maybe my journey is a little bit interesting because it's not a traditional insights journey. People go to university and study sort of research methodologies, data analytics, become experts in those fields. And one of the things I'm really clear about is that I'm not an expert in insights generation. What I'd like to think that I've developed expertise in is how do we best use those insights and how do we best make sure that decision makers, policy makers are aware of them. So it's the amplifying of those insights is probably my skill sets. And part of that is because I haven't come from an insights background, as I say. My background is more communications and public affairs. So I came out of university studying international politics and strategic studies at Aberystwyth University, and then went into politics, worked for a political party at the Welsh Assembly as it was, the Senedd as it is now. And over a period of time, over 7 years, I worked for a political party there, both in opposition and in government, and eventually as the head of communications. So communications was really my background. But over that 7-year journey, I came, I'm not sure disillusioned with party politics is the right word, but as you mature over time, I went from some sort of firebrand, tribalist political mind to someone who just recognizes there are lots of really good ideas out there. They're not always party political. And I was really keen to sort of engage across the political sphere. And as a result of that, I moved into working for an education union, and I specialised in education policy development at that time. Spent another 7 years there as the head of policy development for a national union, the National Union of Teachers as it was, the National Education Union as it is now. I worked across the political divide in policy development and bringing expertise, particularly from the industry that I was in, understanding user needs, understanding the user journey and frontline expertise, which has served me well. And then ultimately from there went to work for Sport Wales, initially as head of insights and policy, and now I've taken on the public affairs and our community investments portfolio. And I might touch a little bit on that later on, because I think our investments approach is one of the best uses of our insights and data and how we actually drive decisions through that. But when I came to Sport Wales, they had and continue to have some really great people in the insights team who are experts in data generation, who are leading in terms of national survey development or qualitative research. But I would argue, particularly when I joined, that they weren't the best at communicating that. And I think that's certainly one thing I found throughout my career in insight is that I'll speak to a lot of academics who are brilliant at generating this insight, but it goes nowhere because they don't have the skills to tell people about it. And probably my skill is telling people about it. And certainly my role here at Sport Wales has been, how do I take the insights we are generating, take the insights that other people are generating as well, both within our sector and academically, and make sure that we are packaging that up in a way that is changing practice, both within the sports sector, but also to Welsh Government. My role here is I have the lead in terms of the public affairs function of dealing with the Welsh Government. So being able to link that insights up to Welsh Government policy development, I think, is crucial.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that idea of communicating insights is, a clear motivator for you. were there any other motivating factors or drivers to kind of move into the insights industry, or was it really that kind of communications angle that really excited you?
I think it's probably the communications angle, but I think the two things go hand in glove, and that's a missing part, I think, of the process usually. As I've already outlined, I think people who generate insights think that creating the insights is the most important thing. People who are in
Mhm.
public affairs think telling people about things is the most important thing. And often you'll find that those two parts of an organization don't always speak together. So you have insights that are being generated that go nowhere, and you have people talking to influential policymakers, but without actually having the
Mhm.
grounding and the data to back up what they're saying. So being able
Yes.
to move into an insight space and actually bring public affairs as part of that approach, I think was an exciting opportunity for me to bridge that gap so that
Mhm.
both when I and the wider policy team are talking to key decision makers, we are doing it on a really solid foundation. We know that the insights that is being generated is really cutting edge, is really informative, is really robust. As an organization, we're governed by the Office of National Statistics. We produce official statistics on behalf of the country. So we know that our methodologies are really robust, and
Mm.
that just helps us have really robust conversations with Welsh Government and other policymakers about the change we want to see, because we are basing it on really good work, really good data and insights, rather than, as often is the case, particularly in the sports sector, some gut feelings. We all know sport is great and we want to talk about how wonderful it is, but actually having that insights to be able to back up some of those points is key. And it was something that I was really keen to bring together.
Brilliant, brilliant. It's a really fascinating kind of marriage, isn't it? Sports and insights. You've got the very visceral level on one side, and then potentially, kind of quite analytical and data and robust on the other side. So, worth asking in terms of the kind of current setup at Sport Wales. How is the insight function currently set up? What does it look like? What's the kind of current scenario?
So we've got a relatively small team. I think there's around 5 or 6 of us in the insights team who are dedicated to just the insights portfolio. We do a lot of, as I say, quantitative work as part of official statistics. We produce every 4 years the School Sports Survey, which is the largest per capita survey of its type anywhere in the world, and the oldest as well. We were the first to establish a survey that understood children and young people's participation, demand, and behaviours. We survey around 120,000 children every 4 years. It's a really big piece of
Yeah.
work. So we go through a cycle with that. We also are part of the National Survey for Wales, establishing the same for adult participation. And we do work with organisations like Savanta around quarterly sort of testing surveys. So there's a lot of quantitative work that goes on. I think there's a missing
Mhm.
piece in terms of our qualitative work. We do some really good work in that space, but it probably doesn't happen as regular. So that's the insights team in terms of our generation. But what we are focused on is how do we make sure that the wider sector organization are working together. So part of our remit is also upskilling the rest of the organization to be insights focused. And we have, part of our role is around performance sport, and we have people who are performance data analysts, strength and conditioning coach who are all using insights and data on a day-to-day basis. We've got a governance team that are using data around the capabilities of those we fund, creating data dashboards, etc. So we are also, whilst we've got an insights team that is specifically in charge of the organization's insights and data, we have people using data on a day-to-day basis right across the organization. Even if we
Mhm.
look at our communications team, they're using data and analytics to map and understand the way our storytelling is working. What engagement is that having? How is that driving decisions around who is coming to us for our investments portfolio? And then
Yeah.
again, looking at our community investments, that team is constantly running data analysis around where our money's going geographically, by sport, by demographics. So as I say, we've got an insights team that I manage, but everyone really has a responsibility for insight at Sport Wales, and that's something we're really keen to press. The other bit I'll just touch on is that about 3 years ago, I established the Welsh Institute for Physical Activity, Health and Sport, along with some other colleagues. That brought together representatives of every higher education institute in Wales. So there's 8 universities in Wales.
Yeah.
All of them are bought into this alongside Sport Wales. So we have a funded partner, if you will, this institute that essentially is bringing together all the best practice and evidence that's being generated by those universities, is a resource for us to be able to draw on. But it's also understanding what is happening elsewhere outside of sport and the sports sector to be able to inform our practice. So it's almost an extension of our insights capability by establishing that network as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've spoken to various people on this podcast, and kind of in my career, sometimes businesses are at different stages of kind of their insight journey. Obviously, sounds like Sport Wales are very well travelled on that journey, bought into insights. Can you put your finger on what it is that why that is? Why have you decided, come to the conclusion, been able to see that insights can help and make a difference?
So we've always had a role around insights and data. We've been official statistics providers, as I say, and we've also have a remit around sport policy development. So it's embedded in us as an organisation. But a couple of years ago, around 5, 6 years ago, we developed a new strategy, and part of that strategy was very much focused on being a learning-led organisation. That is something we hang our hat on as part of our strategy. We can't be a learning-led organisation unless we are constantly monitoring what are the trend data, what's the analytics telling us about what the public want and the public need. And therefore, that's a real key focus for us about having the most up-to-date, robust insights to be able to inform our decision making. A couple of other things, we instigated a new investment approach a couple of years ago, which put data at the heart of that. And so that flip, the fact that we are making decisions about where our money goes and which partners we want to work with and how we want to work with them based on data and insights, probably just amplified the importance, not just within our organization, but
Yeah.
to all those people receiving our funding. Suddenly, people who were perhaps seeing the data and insights, but it was something in their periphery that they were not concentrated on, suddenly saw, well, actually, the decisions being made here about where funding goes and where resource goes based on insights. So we should all pay more attention to insights as a result. Now, some of
Mm.
that is people paying attention to insights because they want the money, which is probably not the right behaviors and characteristics, but ultimately people are always going to be led by resource, so that's understandable. But for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason that's happened, it has amplified the importance of insights both within Sport Wales and I think across our funded partner network, which is no bad thing.
Yeah, as you say, no bad thing to increase and amplify the importance. Is there, now that you are on that journey, is there, can you put your finger on how it looks and how it feels in the business? I don't know if you can compare to previous experiences or roles where insights have been less embedded to now. Is there a tangible qualitative feel or characteristic that you would put your finger on?
I'm not sure if it's a characteristic, but I think that we are both clearer about the importance of insights. As I say, now we are using it to drive investment decisions. People really see the importance of having that insight right in the very first instance, and
Hmm.
and why it's important and how it drives not just decisions around where our money goes, but then the behaviors around how we work with people because of their money. So there's definitely an enhanced awareness and importance given to insights. What I think I would also be really clear about is that it's forced us to be more open and honest as an organization about our failings as well. Failings is maybe too strong a word, but where we can improve. And I think we would openly say now that we've cracked the nut a little bit in terms of insights generation. We probably haven't quite got there in terms of how do we manage and measure impact in a way that isn't just on data? It's a really important aspect of what we do is, what is the data telling us? But we work with human behaviors, where we might see an increase in numbers of participation. That's the data level, but understanding why that's happened is going to
Yeah,
require a different type of impact evaluation.
yeah.
So that insights piece is probably the next step we need to take on the journey is being more comfortable that we don't have a easy linear approach to measuring impact and evaluation. Because when you deal with people, it's understanding complex systems and moving to that system level change rather than program level intervention. That's the big step for us and our partners, I think, now. But moving people to that state of comfort around that is where we're trying to go at the moment. And I think some of the organization are there, some are not. And that's
Mm.
part of our insights journey at the moment.
And it's really interesting you talk around human behavior, terrifically complex, terrifically messy. In terms of trying to start to understand that and get a deeper level of insight beyond the numbers at a very simple level, how do you see that happening in terms of the types of things that you might be doing to start understanding human behaviors? Is it certain methods? Is it different approaches? How do you see that working?
I think all of the above. There's definitely different approaches we can take. I think part of it is just lifting everyone to look at, how are we impacting on changing a system rather than we changing a particular work program
Hmm.
or individual partners. It's making that shift from attribution to contribution. Where are we contributing to the system change rather than directly being able to say our investment here is directly delivering that system societal level change there, because we can't do it. And the other piece is looking at who is part of that evaluation and impact measurement. It's not going to just be looking at what Sport Wales' outcomes are, but everyone we fund. We've established in the last few years a new approach around sport partnerships, a regional approach to sport partnership delivery, moving away from funding 22 local authorities to funding 5 sport partnership regions. And those sport partnership regions are also looking at how do they expand the traditional network, how do they work with housing associations, local health boards,
Okay.
etc. And in doing that, suddenly you are dealing with a completely different cohort of the population, different motivations for why people might be active, different skill sets, expertise, knowledge, and evaluation around what works and what doesn't. So I think that's one of the big shifts we'll see, is that we will approach things differently in different areas and be really comfortable about that. But as a whole, that will help us understand what the wider system changes. But certainly it will also be part of a different approach to measuring that. How do we measure at that
Mm.
system level rather than just at the program level, which is more comfortable, easier to demonstrate, the metrics around that.
Yeah.
And we still need to do that to a certain extent. But I think the biggest shift is making people comfortable with being uncomfortable in the short term.
And that was literally going to be my next question in terms of, you need to start shifting people, start thinking a slightly different way. The challenges, what are those challenges that you can foresee there? Is it that people won't want to do it? Is it that they won't understand it? How will you be able to convince them that this next level of insights is the right thing?
Yeah, again, all of the above, I think. I think there's an element of perhaps don't understand it for some, but I think probably a lack of confidence that they will rather than they
Mm.
can't. It is asking people to change. I think there's always a concern with people who have been funded in a traditional certain way over a period of time. That as a funder, if we're asking them to do something different, is there's a sense of nervousness about that. There's a traditional way of doing it, and how confident can people be in us as a funder that if we're asking them to do something different, we're not going to turn around in 3 years' time and say they've been measuring the wrong things. So we've got to
Mm.
provide them with the confidence to be able to do that. And I know that, I've been part of discussions around evaluation and monitoring with some of our partner network, and they've been very committed to this principle of um, that they, as in organisations working directly with their local populations or sports, etc., we are comfortable that they will always know best around this kind of thing, that they know
Mhm.
that their audience is best. So we want to be able to work with them and be led by some of them. But ultimately, and they're all on board for that type of a change until the point comes where they will say, but tell us what you want. And I think that's probably a lack of confidence that this change is sustainable or this change is really meant by us at Sport Wales. And aggregate that up. We have these kind of conversations with our funders at the National Lottery or the Welsh
Yeah,
Government.
yeah,
We
yeah.
everyone is accountable to someone. So how do you ensure that accountability is there and the confidence for the change? So I think there is a nervousness and giving people the confidence that this can be done, but it's also giving them the support to be able to make that change, because not everyone is an expert in insights, not everyone has that skill set, not everyone has the capacity or the capability. So collaboration around what works is really important. It might not be that every partner is focused on insights and evaluation, but the system is and the sector is, and how do we share that best practice across? So I think the real concern to be about people's capability, but more their confidence to take this leap. And that isn't something that's just, I'm talking about it being a thing for our partners. I think probably within Sport Wales as an organisation, there'll be some people who are further down that journey than others.
Yeah,
And so how do you make sure this doesn't get left to just those who are
yeah,
experts in it, and actually the
yeah,
organisation goes together on it is a really important
yeah.
factor.
And that begs the question: how do you do that? I think it's the kind of $1 million question. You set it up. Were there any particular tactics, strategies, ways of working that can help to not convey and communicate the results of insights, but start to embed a culture of insights and persuade and convince people? Are there any successes that you've had there?
Yeah, I think there's some very practical things you can do in terms of internal communication. So we have a thing called Lightning Learning, which once every 2 months or so, we have different people across the organization just presenting the work that they've been doing. So, the governance team might present some piece of work that they're doing, which on a day-to-day basis I would never be anywhere near, but actually having an understanding of that, knowing what's
Mm-hmm.
happening is really important. So being able to showcase and model where good practice is being seen within the organization to upscale and to just give confidence is really important. And I also think just showcasing the change that it makes rather than drilling down into exactly how that change came about on every instance. So to
Mm-hmm.
give a really good but very simple example, we're always talking within our investments team about how do we fund different types of projects than we traditionally fund. And there was an example recently where we funded a women's basketball team in West Wales. They wanted to increase female participation, but they knew that there was a lot of women and girls who wasn't comfortable being a part
Yeah.
of a basketball and being watched, and they're not particularly sporty. So we ended up funding them for glow in the dark equipment so that they then played basketball and just turned all the lights off. And those women then suddenly found that no one was looking at them, all the lights were off, but they could play. Give it a
Right.
couple of months, and then they've grown in confidence, and they're now regularly participated in basketball in normal settings as well. And,
Yeah.
and I think that's an example of insights being person-led, understanding actually what is the change needed, the motivation needed to get people active who otherwise wouldn't be, investing in it, and then showcasing that back to the sector around simple but effective changes that were led by insights generation. It was that club actually just doing some insights work around what would be the change needed to get people who were otherwise not active from a demographic that we know is underserved in the sports sector active. And then when we share that back across our organization and externally, I think that's the kind of example that we see insights generation can change lives. It might be on a small
Mhm.
scale here, but that is then something that we might get 10 football clubs or 10 rugby clubs or 10 tennis
Yeah.
clubs suddenly thinking, oh, well, we need to ask these questions of the public and make some
Yeah.
small iterative changes. And I think that's an example of it probably hasn't led to a huge additional number of individuals through that
Mm.
investment in the first instance, but has started to create a change that then is going to change the way sport is delivered. And I think that's the kind of showcase we need to do to give people confidence that taking the long road around insights use and impact evaluation is important.
Yeah, yeah. We've done work encouraging female participation in sports, and it's there is a drop off there, isn't there, in terms of kind of teenagers, and then how to get them back is difficult. So really interesting that actually the example you gave there is kind of exactly around that. So when you think around then your insights, and you mentioned it at the top of the podcast in terms of you're not necessarily the person doing the doing, more you are the person selling the doing or telling about the doing. So tell me about, that's a constant challenge that all researchers and insight professionals will face in terms of either how do I convey the essence of a national survey, X amount of focus groups. How do you go around distilling what's important and then communicating that effectively and digestibly?
I think it's obviously audience specific. If you've got a conference or a room full of people who are insights specialists, and actually the last person they want to hear from is me, they would want to hear from a colleague of mine, Dr. John Radcliffe, who is actually expert in GSI mapping and data
Yeah.
intelligence, and they want that granular detail, and they want to
Mm-hmm.
see exactly, what are the trend data points, what is the confidence intervals. They want the detail behind it, and they need the credibility of that. When I'm talking to a policy advisor or a politician or a sport partner, they probably want the top three lines, what's the most easily digestible and how have we got to understand this? And the way I think is really important to package that up is in the storytelling. It's, creating a human interest story around what actually this means. So if we're saying there's 120,000 children taking part in a school sports survey, and what we know is that there is a gap in participation for women and girls that can be plugged because there's a huge demand for this sport in this area, then how do we
Mhm.
bring that to life? With some examples of clubs in that area we know are actually doing really good work, or individuals. How do we personalize some of this evidence? So I think that's probably where, from a presentational point of view, I can play a really important role, is creating the feel around the data so people can visualize it, people can empathize with it, people can see it in
Mhm.
their locality, or any changes that they may make because of the data they see, they can start visualizing what that change will end up in. But then always understanding that this is underpinned by that really robust data. So how do I make sure we are referencing back to the sample sizes and the work that goes in to develop this data? But finding that mix of granular detail and visualization of the top lines is really important, and being
Mm.
really, this isn't anything innovative or new, but being really tailored to the audience you're speaking to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's an interesting point in terms of, that kind of personalization. And, you mentioned human behavior at the start. That is, it does bring things home to people. It's always more impactful, I think, as you say, when, you can tell a story of somebody, or you can show a consumer actually saying something in their own words, as opposed to me, you, somebody else saying it. It's just more impactful. In terms of storytelling itself, obviously that personalization is one thing. Are there any other tips around storytelling that you've garnered either in your kind of current role or from, interestingly, your kind of political career?
Um, I'm not sure if it's a tip as such, but certainly we want to lean more into that. We know that when it comes to evidence in reflective practice, understanding different ways of measuring impact, that storytelling piece is really important. I think there is a danger of going too far with it, that you forget the actual metrics and numbers as well. So finding that balance is important. But at the
Mm-hmm.
moment, there's a really easy way to show data. There's a very difficult way to show stories,
Mm-hmm.
or at least stories that give confidence that there's data behind them. We've just developed a new role in the organization as a storytelling lead, and I've been really open about that job title because we know
Yeah.
we want someone with an insights background who understands quantitative and qualitative data generation, but is thinking about how do we tell the story around that. We've also had a role as a impact evaluation lead. We really want to be clear that we are not just generating insights. We want to generate the impact and understand that from the start.
Mm.
And it's still a novel practice for us, so we are still developing, how that can look. But I know there's organisations, Sport New Zealand, do this really well. They've really lent into the understanding around storytelling. If I credit them, it was a colleague from Sport New Zealand who talked to me about the storytelling lead that they'd established, who works
Yeah.
specifically with their colleagues in the education department to be able to tell the stories of sports power on education and sports power and play, because they have a remit around that as well. So it's not that I've got any tips or experiences, I guess, rather than just that we are really committed and leaning into that storytelling aspect of it as well now, to
Mm.
better be able to personalize and tell the story of the data that we're generating, because we've got
Yeah.
complete confidence in our data, but we also know that by and large we are talking to people who are not insight specialists.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's the critical thing, isn't it? And it's making uh 10 charts, or a whole low report of text just more accessible, more interesting, more engaging. Um, you, as you say, have worked across a great range of different industries and kind of brought different experiences across those industries into where you currently are, and kind of been on that journey. I suppose as you look back over your career, either the full remit of it or more recently, is there anything that any kind of tips, recommendations, hints that you would give to people coming up in the insights industry in terms of what you've seen as important and how that's helped you get to where you are today?
I think the two tips that I would give is, one is to try new things. and be really confident about failing. And I know this is a lot of thing that practices coming through at the moment. Part of design thinking approaches, for example, is very much test, prototype, ideate, fail,
Mhm.
retest.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've got a service design team that we've established at Sport Wales based on that design thinking approach, having done some research into our investments team's work. And we recognise that fail fast and test is a really important aspect for us. So having that confidence to be able to fail and having organizations and aligning yourself to organizations that are comfortable in that is really important. And
Mhm.
then to build on that, then the second point I would say is to be bold about some of the radical change. We, as I say, created a new investment approach a few years back where we underpinned our decisions based on data. It used to be that our partner network would tell us things and we would take funding decisions based on that. Now we've switched to we are looking at the data we have, making funding decisions based on that data, which has completely flipped the relationship. They no longer need to prove to us anything. We are giving them money and they need to improve. And that improvement, again, is embedded in we are completely comfortable with them trying things and failing and improving. It's about a better type of relationship. But
Yeah.
inevitably, if you change an investment approach, there are some organizations that are going to see an increase in investment and some are going to see a decrease. It did
Mhm.
cause and does cause disruption. But knowing there was the right thing to do, being really clear about why we were doing it and what was the intention behind using the insights in the way we were and what we were hoping to see as an outcome of that was really important. And it was, I think it's the brave thing to do is to sometimes upset organizations and
Yeah,
partnerships and
yeah.
to be a disruptor. No one wants to do that, of course, but ultimately sometimes if you want to instigate change, things have to change. It's as simple as that, unfortunately. And that will come to us as well at times, whether our partners rightfully should challenge us over decisions. If they think that things should change, that's the kind of robust conversation you need to have around data and insights. So the two tips I would say is that, fail and fail fast and fail often. And then also be brave and understand that sometimes the right change, if you see it through insights and data, will be uncomfortable for you and those you want to work with.
Yeah, yeah, I always think it's a really important point. We obviously do a lot more work in the commercial world than the social world, but this is in our world, kind of somebody's money. In your world, it might be somebody's lives, some people's lives. But it's important, even if the research is bad news. You've got to be honest and upfront about that, and kind of tell it as it is. Yes, there might be a few good points, but if it's not worked, there's no point sugarcoating it, is there?
Yeah, and I know it's a really cliche thing to say that, you either win or you learn, I guess. But I think even in the commercial world, that if things don't work, actually being able to understand that quickly and why they didn't work and move on to the next thing is really important. I don't have a commercial background per se. I'm doing an MBA at the moment, and that's definitely from everyone that was on my course who were entirely from the commercial background in this master's course that I'm doing are really clued into that idea, and they are very quick to drive on to the next decisions. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that can be, at a pace that is detrimental, but broadly, I think that the commercial sector is very much focused on understanding what's worked and what hasn't in a quicker way than maybe the public sector can
Yeah.
be. And that's the nature of the industries they're in. But I think the commercial or public, that sort of decision thinking approach, design thinking approach rather, understanding what's worked and why, and even if it's bad news, like, what have we learned is really important.
Yeah, yeah, it's a critical thing to make sure that we are always, that we always bear in mind. We're in a state of flux, change, revolution, evolution. Who knows in research and insights as we look forward? Is there a particular challenge that you see over the next 2, 5, 10 years for insights, or uh,
I think probably everyone is grappling with AI and
Mhm.
that modeling approach. I think it could be for insights revolutionary, and it could be something that completely changes our approach around data analytics in particular, but understanding decisions, understanding priorities. I think that AI and that type of approach could be brilliant. It could also be terrifying insofar as it's only as good as the information you put into it, and machine learning is very much geared off what's publicly available and often that isn't always the best information, or at least it's not weighted specifically around credibility. It's what it's being fed with. So that could also lead to really poor decision-making processes as well. And I think if we take it to its extreme, we probably will also lose some of that human interest, person-centered approach of insights. I think my excitement is where it could take the data analytics element of insights. My concern is where it takes the qualitative person-centered approach of insights, and finding a balance for us as an organization between those two, I think, is a really important thing. The other concern around it is, how would you get at the forefront of that kind of approach, don't get left behind, but at the same time are robust in terms of data protection,
Good old GDPR.
good old GDPR, and all the other concerns that might go with that using technology that we're all really excited by, but also probably 3 steps behind where it can get to at the moment. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is how are we moving with the times when the times are moving so quickly?
Yeah, I went to the MRS conference a couple of weeks ago, and the opening talk was around that, it's here to stay. It's happening. Disruption is happening now. We need to get with it and make sure that even if we aren't perhaps leading it, we know what's going on and we're happy with how we're using it. So I think that's a really valid point. One final question. This podcast is all about the insight and why it matters. So from your experience, in terms of your different roles, either in terms of making insights matter more for a business or communicating insights, is there one golden tip that you would say for making insights matter more?
I'd go back to my first introduction, really, is the communication of it. As I said, I think there's loads of brilliant people who can generate insights really well. The ones who do it really exceptionally are the ones who can tailor that insights to the audiences they're working with, find a way of communicating it so that it's actually used. There's lots of brilliant insights sitting on shelves in academics' offices that have never seen the light of day because they haven't got the skill set to be able to communicate it. And there's also lots of people like me who are brilliant communicators that just don't understand the insights. So it goes both ways. But whether you're doing it as an individual or you're doing it as part of an organization, marrying up the ability to communicate insights and the insights generation techniques and methodologies, I think is essential. And when those two things are working in harmony, the right insights are leading the conversation and the conversation is being amplified. And that's when we get to that magic point where change happens as a result of it.
Perfect. That's a very kind of neat joining of two important ideas. Owen, we've come to the end of our time, so just remains for me to say thank you very much for that. Really enjoyed that. Nice to hear a kind of different slant, not just on insights, but also from a kind of more social world and a commercial world. So, other than that, thank you very much. Great to have you on the podcast. Thanks,
for
Owen.
having me.